You're listening to The Mark Cox Show. Find everything Mark Cox at 971talk.com/Cox.
Glad you're back with us for this hour of the Mark Cox Show. We have a special guest right now in studio about a little less than a week ago. About a week exactly. He learned that he is the new chief of police in the city of St. Louis, and that is Chief John Hayden. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be here.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I covered St. Louis politics and the police department for many years, and I know I probably saw you across a couple of police lines over the years. I reached out to a couple of folks that I know that are in law enforcement, that are in the legal community. To a person, they were all very complimentary of you. Those who had had interactions with you called you a real gentleman, good-natured, easygoing. One of them said to me, I hope that the job doesn't change who he is. Do you worry about that at all?
No, I believe that the job will allow me to stay who I am. I'm a hardworking guy. I believe I'm a humble person, and so my work ethic, my pursuit of excellence, I think will balance out. And so, no, I'm not worried that the job will change me.
Well, good. That's because it's got to be a daunting task. I was thinking about this. Your own statistics showed 200-plus murders last year. You've got lawsuits against the department by some of the protesters from the Stockley verdict. You've got challenges keeping your staffing levels up. I think I probably hit maybe some of the bigger challenges you're going to face now that you've landed this job. What are your plans?
Well, the protest investigation is federal.
Right.
So in those cases, what happens is that the federal investigative unit will look at a particular situation, and they will make a decision about whether or not civil rights violations have occurred. And then if they are, they'll do their work and have their findings and their actions, and then anything else that might be department related insofar as violation of policy, they'll send that back to me, and I'll be able to have an opportunity to review things and make decisions about them. So
what's your approach? Is it? I'm throwing around terms that I've heard used. Is it community-based policing? Is it proactively policing? I mean, I understand probably better than maybe some people in the general public, maybe some politicians, that you guys can't be there before shots get fired. I mean, that's the problem. Crime's going to happen, but what's going to be your approach to trying to whip that?
It'll definitely be community-based policing. And so, some people call it community-oriented policing, but at the end of the day, what it means is that you use the community as input. So you get input from community members in order to help you do some of the public safety, to address public safety challenges. And so part of that, the way you do that, though, is you actually spend some time in the community. And one of my signature community pieces was I had a mobile office when I was a district commander. And I actually would put that in areas that have been known to be troubled. And I'd put my mobile office right there in the middle of a drug-infested street, and I'd have my community outreach officers to go up and knock on doors and talk to people, and ultimately people would come out and talk to me. And so, they were able to realize that they can trust me. They were able to realize that I was concerned. I was there. I was physically present. And it made a big difference in our communication with the neighbors on those streets.
Sure, because you've got it. I mean, let's face it, one of the biggest challenges every officer I talk to says is that they get to a crime scene, nobody will talk to them.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah, it happens. It happens quite a bit, and that's why I'm hoping that our approach from this point forward will be one that encourages people to talk to us.
Yeah.
But in order, it's like anything else. In order to develop that trust, you have to earn trust. And so the only way you can earn trust is to be engaged with people, be able to talk with people, them to understand some of your concerns, and that positive feedback will build a relationship, and the relationship is what is used to solve crimes.
Right. I knew Larry O'Toole pretty well, former Chief O'Toole. I supported him in what he was doing during these protests and everything. You've obviously worked alongside him for 30 years now.
Absolutely.
What are you going to do differently than what he did as chief?
Well, he was only, he wasn't there, but during the interim.
Right. And
so I think that he actually saw some of the things that I'm actually going to do. He actually saw the need to address some of that. It's just the circumstances and timing, of course, didn't allow him to put his plan into fruition. But I think that a lot of ideas that we had are similar. But one thing different is I was already in North Patrol, so a lot of the crime, 67% of those homicides occurred in the districts that I were over, and so and 50% of all violent crime. I've kind of focused on a what I call a rectangle.
Okay.
And it's where most of the violent crime occurs. And I'm going to put all of my special ops, my mobile reserve, my anti-crime units up in those areas. And then not only just in those areas, but you already mentioned the streets. And so in those areas, on those streets, particularly known for heavy drug activity, we're going to be up in that area with multiple resources.
We're talking to new St. Louis Police Chief John Hayden. You need the support of the prosecutor's office so that when your guys on the street and your women on the street go out and make arrests in these areas you're talking about, this triangle, that you're not seeing that same person back out on the street in 6 months or even 10 months, particularly if they've been convicted of a gun crime or something. And the reason that I make that statement is I know that's pretty obvious to you, but here's what I see from the outside looking in. I see some political forces in the city, maybe even in the mayor's office now, who seem to want to go a different direction, maybe a little bit more of a hands-off approach to policing. You guys had, correct me if I'm wrong, 30 officers injured during those protests?
That's
Are
correct.
you worried at all that politics is going to impact your ability to fix this crime problem?
Not at all, because again, I mentioned so the district, the two districts over which I saw, our guys collected over 1,000, or rather seized over 1,000 guns just last year. And so in other words, we haven't had any engagement issues. None of our officers are afraid to do a car stop. None of our officers are afraid to get involved. And so I'm saying that, and I think the seizure of multiple weapons, like I said, for sure over 1,000, and then the search warrants and that. So guys that I have worked with closely over the past 5 years are very much engaged. So I don't see why that should change. And certainly we haven't had any political forces trying to stop us.
Would you have handled the rules of engagement differently for the protests that happened after the Jason Stockley verdict than Chief O'Toole handled them?
I think generally we'd have handled some of them the same. So before the Stockley protests took place, I was the commander of District 5. And we had some aftermath of some of the Michael Brown protests in the Central West End, for example, in the Loop, for example.
Right.
And so I use an approach that I will refer to as kind of a protective bubble. And so when protesters would be occupying a certain street, we would prevent or divert traffic so that nobody would run into, nobody would do a Charlottesville on us. And so we would protect them that way, but that bubble was able to move. And so basically, as if it were a traffic accident, some other obstruction, we were able to follow that bubble, able to follow the protesters down the street or what have you, to keep them safe. And so so I definitely implemented a very much of a guardian approach. But at the same time, at the end of the day, if somebody's going to break windows, we were going to arrest somebody that's vandalizing property, that's committing a crime. So one instance is a city ordinance about standing in the street versus committing a crime, and we were always very forthright and firm when it came to people breaking the law.
Yeah, I mean, I was told by several police sources that they're, I'm not asking you to defend this, don't get me wrong, but that there were rules of engagement that said if somebody's forcefully coming at you, you need to order them to stop. Before you can physically engage with them, you have to have a spotter. You have to have somebody who's watching you to confirm what happened before you engage. I mean, that's kind of tying the hands of the officers, it strikes me, because in a riot situation, as we saw in Ferguson, rocks get thrown at you, bottles get thrown at you. That just seems pretty restrictive.
So some of it does get a little complex. Like some of those are better in theory than they are in practice.
Right.
But I think the goal is going to be, if you just stand in the middle of the street, we're gonna try not to be very confrontational, unless you refuse to leave.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I believe that protesters' rights can be preserved under a plan that I would have, as well as citizens that live in the area, that their rights can be protected as well.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. It's impossible to talk about the St. Louis Police Department without discussing the racial issues. There's obviously the St. Louis Police Officers Association, and then there's the Ethical Society of Police. They came out prior to the Stockley verdict and expressed an opinion on what the verdict should be in that case. How do you approach that as an African American?
They're certainly entitled to their opinion. I'm more of a facts guy, having spent 6 years in the Internal Affairs Division under 2 chiefs, and so I know what the facts say, and I know how to examine them very well. I had some very good teachers, and so I don't necessarily mind even policemen expressing their First Amendment rights, but at the end of the day, the facts are going to really govern what happens.
So are you worried at all that there's any racial tension within the department?
I am concerned about that because there is racial tension in the department. But one thing for sure is that I mentioned having been in the internal affairs, but I also taught in the police academy for 5 years.
Okay.
Many of our sergeants and lieutenants and even captains are people that I've trained and have that mentor relationship with them. And so I really believe that my physical presence, my relationships are going to be instrumental in helping me mend some of the racial tension on the department.
You brought up guns earlier, and I saw back just before Christmas the whole gun buyback program. I understand that wasn't a city-run thing. It was funded privately. I know it wasn't taxpayer money that was used. But they painted it as a success. Would you perceive it that way? Do you really think that any of those guns that were turned in prevented a murder or the next crime that might have happened?
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you why. Because there was a number of those guns that were assault rifles. And
there were 6, right? But that was the number they announced. There were only 6.
It may have been only 6, but my next point was going to be is that if I could share with you some of the shell casing management that we do. As it turns out that a lot of these guns are being utilized at multiple scenes. So if you got the rifle or the AK-47, I saw an Uzi out there. If you got the Uzi that would have been responsible for several shootings, then just believe it or not, just one of those guns would have saved many lives. And I know that seems like that's a stretch, but at the end of the day, those are some very menacing weapons used on multiple scenes. And if in that whole, guess what I'm saying? It's a probability. I'm a math guy, so probability would say that that was an overwhelming success because we got several. Not only we got a bunch of assault weapons, but we got another additional weapons that are in people's houses. I saw mothers there to say, "I took this out of my son's room." And so, that was, I can't necessarily, in other words, what you can't count is how many lives were saved by that effort. But I'm telling you that I believe that numerous lives and numerous assaults are less because of that effort.
So I'll grant you that. I mean, I'm assuming some of those rifles might have been used at additional crime scenes. Have you ballistic tested them? Are you going to?
Well, I'm not actually going to go into the specifics of what happens after the fact. But what I'm telling you, because people were able to turn them in with no questions asked.
Anonymously, right? But you still need to know if it's potentially a weapon.
And I'm going to tell you that our normal processing of weapons will occur. But I didn't necessarily want to get to the specifics of how they occur.
I'm sure. Well, I'm guessing that's just standard police practice.
Yes,
you'd want to get to that answer at some point. Before we get done here, Chief, you got Prop P passed despite the efforts of some of the politicians in St. Louis who fought against you on that. So you've got some money to give raises and to get. What's the key though to getting people to want to sign up to be a police officer these days? I know you need to refill constantly positions where people are resigning and leaving and retiring.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Hey, I've talked with Judge Edwards, and we've talked about a pretty aggressive recruitment campaign, and I believe that is going to be able to help. Some of our community policing, I believe, will build bridges, and so there are probably some people in the community that may be somewhat apprehensive about joining the police department. I think some of our relationships that we're going to make over the next in short order is going to help people to want to be policemen. Hey, it worked for me, and I've been on 30 years. But I mean, hey, I didn't grow up always want to be a police officer. But I talked to a friend of mine that compared it to the military, and a light bulb went off in my head about it. And so I think that can happen with other people. But I think the public trust issue is going to have to raise, and we're going to have to establish some relationships. And I think we'll start to reap the benefits from those.
Chief John Hayden, St. Louis Police Department, thank you so much for your time.
I'm honored to be here.
Well, it's great to meet you, and best of luck, because I know that you've got a steep hill to climb with some of these challenges you're going to face.
Yes,
and we always stand behind police here on this program and this radio station and try to give them all the support that we can. So Liz is telling me I've got a little more time. I got a little more time than I thought I did. I'm sorry.
Perfect.
I thought we were almost out of time. How about that?
Fine.
So what about the morale issue in the city? Do you worry about that at all? Because I've talked to officers maybe since the Stockley verdict protest. I keep going back to that, but that's the most recent thing where a lot of them didn't always feel they had the full support of the mayor's office. What do you do to address that?
Well, I don't. I haven't actually talked to any of them that said they didn't have full support of the mayor's office. Well, I think, but kind of on what you said a little earlier, I think money was always a concern. I mean, hey, I was very concerned that I think the raise that the county had would have made something like a $12,000 deficit,
a big gap,
a $12,000 difference. And I'm saying, hey, $5,000 is not a deal breaker. $12,000 is a deal breaker. And so I'm thinking, hey. I was pretty certain that we would see some level of exodus. We never knew how many people that would be, but that bothered me, and so I'm so thankful that it passed. And so now I think that we have a little bit more room to. I think that will be an incentive, and I think that'll also work as a recruiting tool.
And that helps with morale. I'm
Absolutely
sure if they know
helps,
they're getting a raise next year, right?
Absolutely helps with morale.
That would make all of us feel good, John Beck. No, I'm just teasing my general manager, just in case he's listening. You know. Hey, Chief, it's great to meet you.
It's great to be here, and I'd be honored to come back anytime you want me to.
Let us know if you ever need to get on the air and talk about something.
Yes,
we appreciate it. All right, thank you. That's Chief John Hayden, the new police chief in the city of St. Louis. All right, stick around. Coming up for you in the next hour, I'm going to get former Missouri Senator Jeff Smith in here, I'm sure, on the bottom line today. Let me guess. What do I think's going to come up? How about Steve Bannon? I'm sure he's going to want to talk about that, so we'll kick that around, and we'll, of course, get to your phone calls. Phone number